In the dim light of her cramped apartment, Sarah Miller sat cross-legged on her unmade bed, her laptop perched precariously on her lap. The faint hum of the city outside was a constant reminder of the life she longed to escape. Piles of textbooks surrounded her, their spines cracked in pages filled with hastily scrawled notes, remnants of sleepless nights spent studying for exams that seemed to come with insurmountable pressure. Each day was a race against time, but today, her attention drifted away from the daunting world of academia and into the glittering realm of social media. Scrolling through her Instagram feed, Sarah's heart raced as she stumbled upon an influencer's latest post. A sun-soaked tropical vacation, complete with palm trees swaying gently in the breeze, sparkling blue waters, and designer outfits that seemed to shimmer in the golden sunlight. The caption read, "Living my best life." It was a phrase Sarah had seen countless times, yet it resonated with her deeper than ever. She clicked on the photo, her eyes drinking in the lavish lifestyle that felt so far removed from her own reality. "Ugh, why can't that be me?" she muttered to herself, a mix of envy and yearning swirling within her. The walls of her small apartment felt like they were closing in, reminders of her struggles and the sacrifices she made to pay for her college tuition. Her scholarship had helped, but the leftover bills for rent and food were relentless. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to imagine a life filled with luxury, where money was never an issue, and happiness was just a shopping spree away. "Sarah, you need to focus," she chastised herself, shaking her head as she reluctantly minimized the window. But as she glanced around her room, cluttered with reminders of her modest existence, a thrifted couch, a tiny kitchen with barely enough space for a microwave and a mini fridge, she couldn't help but feel trapped. The dreams she had of a glamorous life fluttered away like the autumn leaves outside her window, leaving her with a hollow ache in her chest. Determined to change her narrative, Sarah logged into her dating app, fingers hovering over the screen. She had heard stories of people finding love and wealth through unexpected connections, and while her friends had cautioned her against looking for a sugar daddy, the idea had begun to take root. What if she could meet someone who could elevate her life? Someone older, wiser, and perhaps a little lonely? She dismissed her doubts, her heart racing at the thought of the possibilities. That very afternoon, she found herself in a local coffee shop, a popular spot known for its artisanal brews and eclectic clientele. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans enveloped her as she stepped inside, her senses igniting with a blend of warmth and excitement. She ordered a cappuccino, her fingers tapping nervously against the counter as she scanned the room. A few tables away, an older man sat alone, his silver hair neatly combed back and a well-tailored suit that hinted at affluence. He was absorbed in a thick book, his brow furrowed in concentration. Her heart raced. Was this her chance? Gathering her courage, Sarah approached him, her pulse quickening as she introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Sarah. Do you mind if I join you?" He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Of course, I'm Edward Thompson," he replied, his voice smooth and deep, like the rich coffee they served. "What brings you here today?" As they settled into conversation, Sarah found herself captivated by Edward's charm. He spoke with an eloquence that made her feel as if she were sitting in a cozy library rather than a bustling coffee shop. He shared tales of his travels, sailing in the Mediterranean, attending galas in Paris, and dining with influential figures. Each story painted a picture of a life filled with adventure and luxury, igniting a spark of ambition within her. "Wow, that sounds incredible," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. "I've always dreamed of traveling like that, but college keeps me tied down." Edward nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Education is important, but life is short. You should seize opportunities when they arise." His words resonated with Sarah, and she felt a connection forming between them, one that went beyond mere attraction. But she reminded herself to tread carefully. "What do you do for a living, if you don't mind me asking?" "I've spent most of my life in finance," he replied, a wistful smile playing on his lips. "Now, I focus on philanthropy. I believe in using my resources to make a difference in the world." Philanthropy. The word lingered in Sarah's mind, a siren call to her ambitions. She could picture herself standing alongside Edward at charity galas, wearing elegant gowns and mingling with the elite. It was a world she had only glimpsed through a screen, but now it felt tantalizingly within reach. As the conversation flowed, Sarah felt herself drawn deeper into Edward's world, her initial intentions clouding under the weight of his stories. But in the back of her mind, the whisper of her dreams remained, reminding her that this connection could be advantageous. Weeks passed, and as their meetings became more frequent, Sarah's friends began to express their concerns. Over coffee one afternoon, Jenna, her best friend since childhood, leaned in, her brow furrowed with worry. Sarah, are you sure about this? He's much older than you. Jenna, it doesn't matter, Sarah replied, brushing off the concern. He's kind, and he has so much to offer. I can learn so much from him. But what about what you want? Jenna pressed, her voice low. Are you sure this isn't just about the money? No. Sarah exclaimed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. I mean, yes, I want a better life, but Edward is interesting. We have a connection. Can't you see that? Jenna hesitated, her expression softening. I just don't want you to get hurt, Sarah. This could end badly. But as Sarah looked away, her heart racing at the thought of the life she envisioned, a life filled with luxury, success, and perhaps even love, she felt more determined than ever. The thrill of her ambitions drowned out the cautionary voices around her. She was ready to embrace whatever this relationship could bring, even if it came with a price. As she left the coffee shop, her mind was a whirlwind of dreams and desires. She glanced back at the table where she and Edward had shared so many stories, and a small smile tugged at her lips. Little did she know that the path she had chosen would lead her to confront not only her ambitions but the very essence of love itself. As the evening light bathed the opulent ballroom in a warm glow, Sarah Miller stood at the entrance, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and the soft murmur of laughter floated through the room, punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses. She felt out of place, a small fish in a vast ocean of wealth and sophistication, but the thrill of being there was intoxicating. Edward Thompson, her companion, had promised her a night to remember, and she was determined to soak it all in. Sarah adjusted her dress, a stunning emerald green that hugged her curves in all the right places, a gift from Edward, of course. She looked around, taking in the lavish decorations, golden chandeliers, intricate floral arrangements, and guests adorned in designer attire. It was a world she had only seen in magazines, and now she was a part of it. The realization sent a shiver of exhilaration down her spine, but a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her of the ulterior motives that had led her here. Sarah, darling. Edward's voice broke her reverie. He appeared at her side, effortlessly charming in his tailored tuxedo, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. You look absolutely stunning. Shall we? She smiled, her heart fluttering at the compliment. Thank you, Edward. This place is incredible. It is, he agreed, his eyes scanning the crowd. But the real treasure tonight is you. His gaze was warm, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was part of his charm, a practiced act to win her over. As they moved through the crowd, Edward introduced her to various guests, each one more affluent than the last. They were a mix of old money and new, discussing investments, art, and philanthropy with an ease that made Sarah's head spin. She nodded and smiled, trying to keep up with the conversations, but her thoughts began to drift. She was here for the experience, but a deeper part of her was still calculating, weighing the costs and benefits of her relationship with Edward. Can you believe the audacity of some people? A woman remarked nearby, her voice dripping with disdain. Throwing money at every cause, as if that makes them better than the rest of us. Money can't buy class, another chimed in, and laughter erupted around them. Sarah glanced at Edward, who seemed unperturbed, even amused by the gossip. She admired his ability to navigate these social waters with such grace. But as she watched him, she felt a pang of guilt. Was she becoming one of them, someone who valued wealth over sincerity? The thought sunk deep, and she pushed it aside, reminding herself of her aspirations. Shall we dance? Edward asked, extending a hand towards her. Of course, she replied, placing her hand in his. As they glided onto the dance floor, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. Edward led her effortlessly, his movements smooth and assured. The music enveloped them, and for a moment, she forgot the nagging doubts in her mind. You're a natural, he murmured, leaning closer as they twirled under the shimmering lights. I can see why you're so popular. Sarah chuckled, but the compliment felt hollow. I don't know about that. I'm just trying to keep up. You're doing wonderfully, he insisted, his gaze holding hers. But I must admit, I often wonder how you truly feel about all of this. His question caught her off guard, and she hesitated. What do you mean? Being here with me, he clarified, his expression earnest. I know I'm not exactly what you envisioned for your life. You're young, vibrant, with a bright future ahead of you. I just want to make sure you're not feeling trapped. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord within her. Sarah had never considered herself trapped. She had willingly entered this relationship, But was it purely for the lifestyle it offered? I enjoy spending time with you, Edward. You've shown me a world I never thought I'd see. He smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. It's important to me that you know I care for you, not just for your youth and beauty. My life has been complicated, and I'm not the easiest person to love. Sarah felt a twinge of guilt wash over her. She had entered this relationship with her eyes wide open, but hearing Edward's vulnerabilities made her question her own intentions. I appreciate that, but I'm happy. Really? Good, he said, pulling her closer as the music swelled. But I want you to know that it's okay to express your feelings. I'm not as intimidating as I seem. As the dance ended, they stepped away from the floor, and Sarah felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The evening wore on, filled with laughter and stories exchanged over lavish hors d'oeuvres. Yet, as the party continued, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Later that night, as they sat on a secluded balcony overlooking the city skyline, Edward lit a cigar, the smoke curling into the night air. You know, Sarah, he began, his tone contemplative, aging is a strange thing. You think you have all the time in the world, but then you wake up one day and realize it slips through your fingers. She studied him, the lines etched on his face, the weariness in his eyes. What do you mean? I've lost so much, friends, family. It can be lonely, despite the wealth and the parties, he confessed. I often wonder if anyone truly cares for me or if it's just my money that draws people in. His vulnerability struck a chord within her, and her heart ached with empathy. Edward, I care about you. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. He looked at her, searching her eyes for honesty. But do you care for me or for what I can give you? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the question hung heavy in the air. She looked away, her heart racing as she confronted the truth she had been avoiding. I started this relationship with certain expectations, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't expect to feel connected to you. Edward sighed, the weight of his years pressing down on him. You're still so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. I worry that I might hold you back. Maybe I'm not as focused on what's ahead as you think, she said, her voice gaining strength. I want to be here with you. Do you? He challenged gently, his gaze unwavering. Yes, she affirmed, her heart pounding. But I also want to be honest. The truth is, I've thought about what this means for my future, about security and stability. Edward nodded, his expression inscrutable. And that's fair. But please, don't lose sight of what truly matters. Just then, the serene moment was interrupted by the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. Sarah turned to find a striking woman approaching them, her expression fierce and determined. Dad! She exclaimed, her voice cutting through the ambience like a knife. What are you doing out here with her? Sarah's heart sank as she realized this was Lily, Edward's estranged daughter, who had been mentioned in passing. The tension in the air thickened, and Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why was Lily here? What did she want? Edward straightened, a look of surprise washing over his features. Lily, I know, Dad. You don't get to explain yourself. You've made enough questionable decisions already, Lily interrupted, her voice laced with anger. And what about her? You think she's really here for you? Lily, that's not fair, Edward replied, his voice steady but tired. Sarah. Lily scoffed, her gaze narrowing. You don't even know her. You think she's here for love? Look around, Dad. You're a target, and you're too blinded by loneliness to see it. The confrontation left Sarah reeling. She felt exposed, vulnerable under Lily's scrutiny, as if the walls she had carefully constructed around her intentions were crumbling. Lily, please, Edward pleaded, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and hurt. This isn't what you think. Isn't it? Lily shot back, crossing her arms defiantly. You've spent years pushing me away, and now you're trying to fill that void with someone half your age. You think I won't step in and protect you from this? Edward's expression turned pained, and Sarah felt a wave of sympathy for him. We were just talking, Lily. Talking? Or scheming? I don't trust her, Dad. You need to be careful. With those words, Sarah's resolve began to waver. The doubt that had been lurking in the shadows of her mind now stood front and center. She glanced at Edward, whose face was a mixture of frustration and sadness. Lily, I'm not trying to replace you, Edward said softly. But you need to understand that I'm not the same man I was when you last saw me. I'm doing my best to find happiness. Lily's expression softened slightly, but her stance remained firm. And what about her happiness? She's playing a dangerous game, and I won't let you get hurt again. Sarah felt the weight of Lily's words. Was she really just a pawn in this game as the golden rays of the setting sun filtered through the expansive windows of Edward Thompson's opulent penthouse? Sarah Miller found herself in a moment of introspection. The lavish surroundings, adorned with priceless art pieces and elegant furnishings, felt both intoxicating and suffocating. She had been drawn into this world, a stark contrast to her humble life, but now with each passing day, the weight of her initial intentions pressed down on her conscience. "Sarah, are you with me?" Edward's voice broke through her reverie. He sat across from her at a polished mahogany table, his gaze steady yet softened by age. The lines on his face told stories of a life richly lived, and she felt a pang of guilt for having entered this relationship with ulterior motives. "Sorry, etwas." "I was just thinking," she replied, forcing a smile to mask her inner turmoil. "About everything." "Everything?" he echoed, leaning forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Or just us?" She hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a delicate glass ornament. How could she explain the conflict brewing within her? On one hand, she was falling for him. His charm, his intellect, the way he made her feel valued. On the other, the ambition that had initially driven her to him was still there, gnawing at her thoughts like a persistent shadow. "Both, I guess," she finally said, her voice soft. "It's just complicated." Edward nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life tends to be complicated, especially when emotions are involved. But you must always remember the truth of your feelings, Sarah. What do you truly want?" His question pierced through her defenses, and for a brief moment, she contemplated sharing her fears and ambitions. But the thought of revealing her true self was daunting. She had built a facade, one that allowed her to navigate this world of affluence, and tearing it down felt like a betrayal. I want to be successful," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To have a life that's different from what I grew up with." Edward studied her intently, his eyes searching for more than just the surface. "And do you believe success is tied to wealth? Or is it something deeper?" His inquiry made her heart race. Sarah had always equated success with financial stability, with the ability to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live without worry. But as she looked into Edward's eyes, she began to question if that was all there was to it. I don't know," she stammered. "Maybe I thought it was. But now, I see how complex it all is." "Complexity is what makes life beautiful, Sarah. It's the connections we forge that define our existence." Edward's voice was warm, a comforting embrace that enveloped her in the moment. "What about us? What do you see for us in the future?" His question took her aback. The future? The idea of a future with Edward felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She had not allowed herself to consider it seriously, fearing that it would lead her down a path she wasn't ready to traverse. I want to be honest with you," she finally managed, her hands trembling slightly. "But I'm still figuring things out." Edward's expression softened, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Honesty is the foundation of any relationship. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." As the evening wore on, Sarah felt a shift within her, a burgeoning affection for Edward that was beginning to overshadow her initial motivations. But just as quickly as that warmth spread, she felt a chill of doubt creeping in. What if the wealth and lifestyle she sought was intertwined with the very person she was starting to care for? Could she reconcile those two conflicting desires? The following week, Edward invited Sarah to his office, a sleek, modern space located in one of the city's most prestigious buildings. The walls were lined with awards and accolades, a testament to his successful career. Edward had suggested they discuss a potential business opportunity, and Sarah's heart raced at the thought. As she entered the office, she was greeted by the sight of Edward seated behind an impressive desk, a myriad of documents spread before him. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint aroma of his cologne. "Welcome, Sarah," he said, looking up with a warm smile. "I have something I think you'll find intriguing." "What's that?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Edward gestured for her to sit opposite him. "I want to invest in a project that I believe has great potential. But I need someone I trust to manage it, and I see that potential in you." Her heart raced as he continued. "I want to provide you with the resources to make it happen. If you're willing, I'd like to entrust you with a substantial amount of money to get started." Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. This was the opportunity she had always dreamed of, a chance to secure her future. But it also came with strings attached, strings woven from her growing feelings for Edward. Edward, are you sure? I mean, this is a huge responsibility, she replied, trying to mask her excitement with caution. Absolutely, he affirmed, his voice steady. I believe in your abilities, Sarah. This could be a game changer for both of us. The weight of his words pressed down on her. This was a chance to rise above her circumstances, but at what cost? She would be stepping deeper into a world that was both alluring and fraught with emotional complexity. Okay, I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But I want to make sure I can do this without compromising my values. Edward leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. Values are what guide us, Sarah. If you ever feel conflicted, I want you to come to me. We can navigate this together. As she left his office that day, Sarah felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her more than ever. She was at a crossroads, her heart and ambition warring against each other. The allure of wealth and success tugged at her, yet the genuine connection she felt with Edward complicated everything. Days passed, and as she lay in bed at night, Sarah found herself wrestling with her thoughts. She began to realize that her feelings for Edward were becoming more profound than she had anticipated. The way he listened to her, the kindness he showed, and the respect he had for her ambitions. These were facets of their relationship that she could never have imagined in the beginning. But with each passing day, the fear of losing sight of her original goals loomed larger. How could she pursue her dreams while also allowing herself to fall for the very man who represented the life she sought? The dichotomy of love and ambition felt like a storm brewing within her, and she was unsure which side would prevail. One evening, in a moment of vulnerability, she decided to confide in Edward. They were sitting together on the terrace, a breathtaking view of the city sprawled before them. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Edward, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I need to talk to you about something important. He turned to her, his expression open and attentive. What is it, Sarah? You know you can tell me anything. Taking a deep breath, she plunged ahead. I'm starting to realize that my feelings for you are growing stronger. But I'm scared that I'm losing my focus, losing myself in this relationship. Edward regarded her with a mixture of understanding and empathy. It's okay to be scared, Sarah. Love can be daunting, especially when it intertwines with ambition. But you mustn't feel that you have to choose one over the other. Your dreams are important. But what if I become too attached? She pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I lose sight of what I wanted in the first place? He reached out, taking her hand in his, a gesture both tender and reassuring. Life is about balance. You can pursue your ambitions and build a relationship with me. It doesn't have to be an either-or situation. His words resonated with her, and for the first time in a while, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a way to navigate this complex path without sacrificing one for the other. But as her heart began to embrace the possibility, the shadows of her initial intentions loomed larger, casting doubt on the authenticity of her feelings. As the evening air grew cooler, Sarah found herself lost in thought, contemplating the intricate dance between love and ambition. She could see a future where both could coexist, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Would she be able to maintain her integrity while allowing herself to love Edward fully? Or would the ambitions that once drove her create an insurmountable rift between them? The questions swirled in her mind, and as she looked into Edward's eyes, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. In that moment, she realized that the answers would not come easily. The journey ahead would require courage, honesty, and perhaps the greatest challenge of all, self-discovery. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the city, Sarah found herself perched on a bar stool in the familiar cafe where she and Jenna often met. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of pastries. Her best friend Jenna was already there, engrossed in her phone, and as Sarah approached, she looked up with a slightly raised eyebrow, sensing the tension in the air. Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost, Jenna said, concern etching her features. What's up? Taking a deep breath, Sarah slid onto the stool opposite Jenna, her heart racing. I need to talk to you about Edward, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt strange to say his name, as if it carried weight beyond just a man she was dating. Jenna's expression shifted from curiosity to caution. Edward? The 80-year-old widower? Is this about the age difference again? No, Sarah replied, shaking her head. It's more complicated than that. I think I'm starting to really care about him. Jenna's eyes widened in disbelief, and she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. Sarah, you can't be serious. You went into this relationship for a reason, right? The money, the lifestyle. I know, Sarah said, her voice rising in frustration. But it's not just that anymore. I've seen a different side of him. He's not just a rich old man. He's kind, and he really listens to me. He's passionate about his work, about helping others. It's like he's so much more than I thought. Jenna's expression softened, but the concern remained. And what about his daughter? You know she doesn't want you anywhere near him. She thinks you're just after his money. That's the point, Sarah said, gripping the edges of the table. I don't want to be that person. I thought I could keep my feelings separate, but it's getting harder. Every time I see him, I feel guilty. I didn't expect to actually like him, Jenna. I didn't plan for this. Jenna sighed, running a hand through her hair. Okay, but you need to be careful. You can't ignore the implications of this. If you get too involved, what happens when he's not around anymore? What about your dreams? I don't know, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. I just know that I care about him, and it scares me. I don't want to hurt him, but I also don't want to lose what I could have. I need to figure this out, and I need your help. Jenna nodded slowly, contemplating Sarah's words. All right. Let's take a step back and think this through. You need to be honest with yourself about what you want. Is it really him you want, or is it the life he represents? As they continued to discuss Sarah's feelings, she felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Sharing her internal struggle with Jenna had lifted some weight off her shoulders, but it had also made everything feel more real. She was at a crossroads, one that could change her life forever. Later that week, Sarah found herself at one of Edward's charity events, an opulent affair held in a grand ballroom adorned with sparkling chandeliers and lavish floral arrangements. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses as influential guests mingled, all eager to support Edward's cause. As Sarah stood by the bar, sipping a glass of champagne, she caught sight of Edward across the room. He was engaged in conversation with a group of donors, his charisma shining through as he animatedly spoke about the charity's mission. She watched him, her heart swelling with admiration. There was something so genuine about his passion, a stark contrast to the facade of wealth that surrounded them. When he finally spotted her, a smile broke across his face, and he excused himself from the group, making his way toward her. Sarah, I'm glad you could make it, he said, his voice warm and inviting. Wouldn't miss it for the world, she replied, her nerves fluttering as he took her hand, bringing it to his lips briefly. You always throw the best events. Edward chuckled, a hint of pride in his eyes. I do my best. It's important to me to give back. You know, my late wife used to say that philanthropy was the true measure of wealth. I've tried to live by that. Sarah's heart ached at the mention of his wife, but she also sensed a vulnerability in Edward that drew her closer to him. You've certainly made a difference. It's inspiring to see how dedicated you are. As they talked, Edward began to share stories about his wife and their shared commitment to charitable causes. His eyes sparkled with nostalgia, and Sarah could see the depth of his emotions. She was the love of my life. Losing her was devastating. But I know she would want me to continue helping others. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord within Sarah. It made her reflect on her own motivations and the reasons she had initially pursued him. It must be hard, she said softly, to carry on without her. It is, he admitted, his gaze turning distant for a moment. But I believe that love doesn't just vanish. It transforms. I carry her with me in everything I do. It's what drives me. For a moment, silence enveloped them, and Sarah felt an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over her. She realized that behind the wealth and the charm, Edward was a man grappling with profound loss. It made her question her own intentions again. Was she truly falling for him, or was she merely a vessel for his desire to feel loved once more? Edward, she began, her voice trembling. I want to understand you more. I want to be here for you, not just as your partner, but as someone who cares. He looked at her, his expression softening. That means the world to me, Sarah. It's rare to find someone who sees beyond the surface. I've been so afraid of opening up, of letting anyone in again. But with you, it feels different. As the evening progressed, Sarah was swept into the whirlwind of the charity event, mingling with guests, listening to Edward speak passionately about his initiatives. She watched him transform into a charismatic leader, and for the first time, She felt a deep connection with him that transcended material desires. However, amidst the laughter and applause, a shadow loomed over her heart. Doubts began to creep in, whispers of insecurity nagging at her thoughts. Was it really possible for her to be his partner for the right reasons? Later that night, as the event began to wind down, Sarah overheard a conversation between Edward and his daughter, Lily, who had arrived unexpectedly. They were standing a few feet away, their voices low but intense. "Dad, you need to be careful," Lily said, her tone urgent. "I don't want to see you get hurt again. You can't just let someone in so easily. What if she's just after your money?" Edward's voice was steady, but the tension was palpable. "I know my feelings, Lily. Sarah is different. She's not like the others. She genuinely cares about me." "But how can you be sure?" Lily pressed, her concern evident. "You've been alone for so long. It's only natural that you want companionship, but you have to protect yourself. You're vulnerable, and there are people who will take advantage of that." The words pierced through Sarah, leaving her breathless. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she listened to Edward's response. "I understand your worries, but I refuse to live in fear. I want to believe in love again, Lily. And I believe Sarah is worth that leap of faith." As the conversation continued, Sarah's heart raced. Edward's vulnerability resonated with her, but so did Lily's warnings. She was caught in a storm of emotions, torn between her ambitions and the tenderness she felt for the man before her. In that moment, she realized how precarious her situation was. Could she truly navigate this complex web of feelings and expectations without losing herself? And what awaited her if she chose to delve deeper into this relationship? With every word exchanged between father and daughter, Sarah felt the weight of her ambitions clashing with her growing affection for Edward. The evening's festivities faded into the background as she stood there, lost in thought, wondering just how far she was willing to go for love, and what sacrifices she might have to make along the way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city skyline, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her heart racing. The decision she had made weighed heavily on her, yet it felt oddly liberating. She had chosen to fully commit to her relationship with Edward, the wealthy widower who had introduced her to a world beyond her wildest dreams. Although her initial intentions had been driven by ambition, she couldn't ignore the genuine connection they had developed. The thought of navigating her feelings while ensuring her financial future sent a thrill through her veins. "Are you ready?" Edward's voice floated in from the living room, pulling her from her reverie. She took a deep breath, smoothing her hair and adjusting her blouse before stepping out to join him. He stood by the window, looking out at the shimmering lights of the city. His silver hair gleamed in the soft light, and Sarah couldn't help but admire the man he was. Despite their age difference, there was a warmth in his eyes that made her feel cherished. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady. Edward turned to her, a soft smile playing on his lips as he approached. "Good," he said, his gaze lingering on her face. "I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" Sarah feigned surprise, though she was more curious than anything. Edward was known for his grand gestures, and this only fueled her excitement. He took her hand and led her to the door. "Get ready for a weekend you won't forget," he promised, his tone playful. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, Sarah felt a rush of anticipation. They drove to the airport, where a private jet awaited them. The luxury of the experience sent shivers down her spine. She had never imagined herself boarding a private plane, and as they took off into the night sky, Sarah felt like she was living in a fairy tale. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "To a little getaway I have in mind," Edward replied, his tone mischievous. "Somewhere we can unwind and enjoy each other's company." Hours later, they landed at a secluded estate surrounded by lush greenery and the sound of crashing waves. It was a place that felt untouched by time, a hidden paradise. As they stepped out of the plane, Sarah took a deep breath, savoring the salty air mixed with the scent of blooming flowers. "Welcome to my sanctuary," Edward said, gesturing grandly to the sprawling house ahead. The estate was a blend of modern luxury and classic charm, with large windows that offered breathtaking ocean views. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, her heart swelling with gratitude and excitement. Edward took her hand, leading her inside where the soft glow of candlelight illuminated the space. They spent the first evening basking in each other's presence, sharing laughter and stories over an exquisite dinner prepared by a private chef. As the night deepened, they wandered outside to the beach, where the moonlight danced on the waves. "Isn't it beautiful?" Edward asked, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Sarah leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished. It really is, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, the weight of her ulterior motives faded away. She was simply a young woman in love, standing beside a man who adored her. As they returned to the house, Sarah felt a surge of affection for Edward. She wanted to believe that their connection was real, that they could build a future together. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. That evening, as Sarah explored the estate, she stumbled upon a small study tucked away in a corner. The room was filled with books, photographs, and dusty memorabilia that hinted at Edward's past. Her curiosity piqued, and she stepped inside, glancing around. Her eyes fell upon a desk where a stack of letters lay, one in particular catching her attention. It was slightly yellowed with age, the ink smudged but still legible. She picked it up, a sense of foreboding creeping in as she began to read. "Dear Edward," it began, the handwriting elegant yet familiar. As she continued, her heart sank. The letter spoke of betrayal, of investments gone wrong, and of lives affected by Edward's decisions. It revealed a side of him that she had never seen, the darker depths of his past that he had kept hidden from her. "Sarah!" Edward's voice echoed in the hallway, interrupting her thoughts. Panic surged through her as she quickly placed the letter back where she had found it, her mind racing. What else had he concealed from her? She stepped out of the study, forcing a smile as Edward approached. "I was just exploring," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He studied her for a moment, a hint of concern etching his features. "What did you find?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. For a brief moment, she considered confessing, but fear gripped her heart. Would he deny it? Would he try to downplay the revelations she had just read? Instead, she opted for a vague response. "Just some old books and mementos," she replied, her heart pounding. "It's a beautiful place you have here." Edward smiled, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Was it guilt? "Thank you," he said, and they retreated to the living room, where he poured them both a glass of wine. As they settled onto the plush sofa, Sarah couldn't shake the unease settling deep within her. The letter lingered in her mind, the implications of its contents gnawing at her. She had entered this relationship for financial security, but now she was questioning everything. "Are you happy?" Edward asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His attention was focused intently on her, as if he could read her thoughts. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'm really enjoying this trip." But even as she spoke, she felt a growing disconnect between her words and her heart. "Good," he said, his expression softening. "You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You've brought so much joy into my life." In that moment, Sarah felt a pang of guilt. Edward's sincerity was palpable, and she could see the vulnerability beneath his charming exterior. But the letter haunted her, a reminder that beneath the glitz and glamour lay a complexity she hadn't anticipated. As the night wore on, Sarah found it increasingly difficult to shake the revelations of the letter. She felt trapped between her ambition and the burgeoning feelings she had for Edward. What would it mean for her future if she were to continue down this path? The stakes had never been higher, and the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. The moonlight bathed the room in a soft glow as they shared stories and laughter, but in the depths of her heart, Sarah knew that the truth would eventually surface. She would have to confront Edward about what she had discovered. Would she still want to stay by his side when faced with the reality of his past? The uncertainty loomed over her like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its downpour. "I'm glad you're here with me," Edward said softly, interrupting her thoughts. "Me too," she replied, her voice barely audible. But as she gazed into his eyes, she realized that the journey ahead would be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. As the late afternoon sun streamed through the expansive windows of Edward's lavish penthouse, illuminating the opulence that surrounded them, Sarah's heart raced. She stood across from Edward, her mind swirling with the weight of the hidden letter she had discovered during their romantic getaway. The truth lay heavy on her tongue, a mix of fear and determination fueling her courage. "Edward," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk." His brow furrowed as he leaned back in his leather chair, the elegance of the room contrasting sharply with the tension in the air. "What's troubling you, Sarah?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that hinted at his awareness of the storm brewing. "I found the letter," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "The one that spoke about your past, about your fortune." She steeled herself, searching his eyes for any sign of denial. "It mentioned corporate scandals and lives lost. Is it true?" Edward's expression shifted, a mixture of resignation and weariness washing over his features. Instead of the denial she had braced herself for, he sighed deeply, the weight of his past evident in his gaze. Yes, it's true, he admitted slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. But there's more to the story, Sarah. And I owe it to you to explain. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The world she had entered, filled with luxury and charm, suddenly felt tainted. What do you mean? She asked, her heart pounding. Years ago, I was involved in a corporate venture that spiraled out of control, he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. Decisions were made that cost lives, innocent lives. I was young, ambitious, and blinded by greed. When the scandal broke, I lost everything, my reputation, my family. I spent years trying to make amends, pouring my wealth into charity and philanthropy, hoping to atone for my past mistakes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The man she had come to know, the one who swept her off her feet with tales of adventure and wealth, was tangled in a web of guilt and redemption. But why didn't you tell me? Ich wollte understood. Edward interrupted, his voice rising slightly. How could I expect you to understand the depths of my shame? My past is a shadow that haunts me. I didn't want you to see me as that man. But I need to know, she insisted, her emotions flaring. I thought I knew you, but now I feel lost. What if this was all a lie? What if you're just using me to clear your conscience? He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. This isn't about guilt, Sarah. It's about redemption. I've dedicated my life to helping others since that day, but I can't change what happened. I can only try to make it right. She absorbed his words, the gravity of his confession settling in. And what about us? She asked, her voice softening. What are we doing here? Sarah, I care for you, he said, his tone earnest. I never wanted to hide this from you, but I was afraid that knowing the truth would push you away. I've never felt this way about anyone in years. You've brought light into my life. His admission struck a chord within her. Despite the tumult of emotions swirling between them, she couldn't deny the connection they had forged. Yet, in the back of her mind loomed the ambitions that had initially drawn her to him. What was she truly seeking? Was it love, or the allure of wealth and comfort? Before she could respond, the door swung open, and Lily stepped into the room, her expression a mix of anger and concern. Dad, we need to talk, she demanded, her eyes darting between Sarah and Edward. You can't keep hiding from your past. It's time to face the truth. Lily, not now, Edward said, frustration creeping into his voice. We were in the middle of a conversation. Lily crossed her arms defiantly. A conversation about what? How you've been lying to her. You think she deserves to be kept in the dark about who you really are. Sarah felt her heart race again, this time from a sense of impending dread. Wait, what do you mean? She asked, looking between the two. Dad, you're not just hiding your past. You're hiding something much worse, Lily continued, her voice rising. You're terminally ill. You haven't told her, and it's time she knows the truth. The revelation hit Sarah like a slap. She turned to Edward, searching his face for any sign of confirmation. Is it true? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward's shoulders sagged, and he nodded slowly, a sadness enveloping him. Yes, I have cancer. It's advanced, and I don't have much time left. I wanted to protect you from the pain of knowing. The room fell into a heavy silence, the enormity of his words hanging in the air. Sarah's mind raced with conflicting emotions. She could feel her heart breaking for him, for the man who had shown her kindness and love, yet she was grappling with the weight of his secrets. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, tears welling in her eyes. I could have helped you through this. We could have faced it together. Edward stepped forward, his expression pleading. I didn't want to burden you with my fate. I thought if I kept it to myself, you could enjoy the time we had without the shadow of my illness hanging over us. Lily shook her head, her frustration palpable. Dad, this isn't fair to her. You need to be honest. She deserves to know what she's getting into. As Sarah processed the gravity of the situation, she felt the pull of her ambitions clash violently with the reality of her feelings for Edward. The man she had grown to love was not only battling his past but also fighting a battle against time itself. What do you want me to do? She finally asked, her voice trembling. I want you to make your own choices, Sarah, Edward replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I won't ask you to stay out of pity or obligation. I want you to live your life, pursue your dreams. If you choose to be with me, it should be because you want to, not because you feel sorry for me." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she looked at Edward, the weight of his words crashing down on her. She had entered this relationship with ulterior motives, but now everything had changed. The man who had captivated her with his stories of wealth had become someone far more complex, a man seeking redemption, battling illness, and yearning for connection. Lily stepped closer, her expression softening slightly. "It's going to be a tough road ahead, Sarah. But if you truly care about him, you'll have to face the truth together." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue throughout the room, Sarah felt a shift within her. The ambitions that had once burned brightly in her heart began to dim as she looked at Edward, seeing him not just as a wealthy man, but as a human being, flawed yet striving for redemption. "I don't know what the future holds," she said finally, her voice steadying. "But I want to be here, Edward. I want to face this with you." Edward's eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "You make me feel alive again, Sarah. Thank you for being brave enough to face this." Just then, the door creaked open again, and a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, casting an unexpected shadow over the fragile moment they had just begun to forge. The tension in the room thickened, and Sarah's heart raced, sensing that this visitor carried more secrets yet to be unveiled.